imagine a world in which human rights could be meaningfully and truly upheld rather than just be a Western Eurocentric ideal which is espoused universally and fails to reconcile its own contradictions. This is what Emmanuel Levinas' philosophy of the ethics of the other allows us to do. It allows us to dissect and dismantle this hegemonic Western perception of human rights and understand its failures in the 20th century and prior to that as well, and understand how these ideals didn't manifest into reality, into the social and political realities of many different time periods, but in particular the Holocaust, which is the most kind of flagrant example of like how this European understanding of human rights and equality just completely crumbled, and shows how incongruous the ideals are with the social and political realities. And it was from the atrocity of the Holocaust, in which human and gender rights were so like violently transgressed. It was from this atrocity which Levinas, a Jew, developed his philosophy. And a key kind of like point in this philosophy, or a key kind of experience which he had, which can help to illustrate the standpoint which he's coming from, is there was a dog when he was living in World War II. He was living in not a concentration camp, but like a labour camp, in which there was a dog, and this dog's name was Bobby, and Bobby was able to recognise the shared humanity of the Jews and the non-Jews, and did not discriminate, did not differentiate between these different groups. It was just a like emotional kind of like reciprocal connection which he had with all people. And what Levinas is suggesting that we do is, instead of kind of like just kind of like intellectualizing philosophies of human rights, we actually confront the other, the human, which human rights need to apply to in order to be universal. Levinas suggests that in this interaction, kind of which resembles this experience which he had with the dog, which is interacting with the other and looking into their eyes, looking into their face, and confronting them in this kind of mutual interaction in which you're both vulnerable. You can see the emotions, and the humanity is forced. You're forced to confront it. That for Levinas is something, and I think it is a very crucial point to understanding how the Western Eurocentric understanding of human rights has failed to actually manifest concretely and uphold these supposed ideals of universality. And the contradictions, I think it's important to understand why and how this kind of understanding of Western human rights, Eurocentric, paternalistic human rights, kind of emerged. And I would argue that it was only because of the material conditions. The Enlightenment emerged on the basis of material conditions which were facilitated and reached due to the exploitation of other people's bodies and the exploitation of communities and nations, and the devaluation of these people's humanity, extracting wealth from them and then using it to bring wealth and kind of like enlighten society. This is kind of like a condition which the intellectual kind of like which kind of allowed this kind of like intellectual flourishing, because if your material needs are satisfied, you can start to philosophize about these sorts of things. And I think it's important to recognize that there's not only was there a clear disparity between the ideals espoused by Western human rights and conduct of the political institutions and the way the societies operated. But it's also important to recognise that this tradition of the Enlightenment was contributed to by the rise of colonialism and colonial exploitation. Just very quickly, John Locke, who wrote the key kind of like influential Enlightenment thinker, who wrote in the second treatise on government that all individuals are kind of created equally, and that there's kind of espoused individual liberty and equality. He was an investor in the Royal African Company, which facilitated the African slave trade. Also, he wrote a document to solidify the constitutions of Carolina in 1669 in the colonies of America, which espoused that, I'll just very quickly get it up, every free man of Carolina shall have absolute power and authority over his N-word slaves. So the disparity is very clear there, but I think you can see that this inability to reconcile and understand the importance to protect, the responsibility to protect all humans is not only is it not being done there, but it is being the opposite of protection is occurring. Violence is occurring by the people which are espousing the ideals. So the irony and like the paradoxical nature of this, and the tradition which Western perceptions of human rights, that tradition from which it's emerged, and all these contradictions can be further kind of like pathologized, and these patterns can be observed with the Holocaust and the inability to actually prevent fascism and dehumanization. And like it wasn't until the late 20th century that most nations colonized by the English or the Belgian or the French or Portuguese or Spanish or Dutch or whoever, that colonialism is an ongoing phenomenon and exploitation continues to occur simultaneously, whilst the powers and the paternalistic kind of like narratives of human rights being like universal, and this kind of superiority complex that nations like France or America or England have, that there's human rights there, unlike in these other savage colonies. That is the colonization, the exploitation, and the benefits which have been the dividends which have come from this exploitation continue. And I think also, just very quickly, in terms of gender rights, muhas, hijras, and other gender non-conforming third genders can also be understood, and kind of like their humanity and the responsibility to protect their right to express gender. That can be, we can use a Levinasian framework to help facilitate this as well. And I think it's a necessity that we do have this interaction with the face of the other and critically examine and dismantle the hollow ideals of human rights, which this Eurocentric tradition has produced, and the contradictions and the violence and the way in which they so transparently betray these human rights. I think that needs to be critically examined.